Hey, this video here is for my boy Kenobi. We're going to be going over how to paint some Black Templar Space Marines. So this is some some instructions to show how I got the specific results that I did for the models that he commissioned me for. You can see some of those here. We got Primaris Aggressor. Got another Primaris Intercessor here. And these guys were commissioned up by Senor Kenobi. And so now we're going to go through how we got that specific look on them. So the first thing I did with the model is primed it with Chaos Black Games Workshop Primer. Obviously, you can prime it whatever you want. But I just go with Chaos Black because it's the easiest base. And the second thing that I did, which won't be shown on the video here, is that over all the armor plating that's going to end up black in the end, I went and applied a base coat of Chaos, or not Chaos Black, Abaddon Black, from the actual paint range, right? So the black out of the pot. Now, the reason that's important is that the black primer and the Abaddon Black paint do not have the same finish. So it's very important that if you're going to be painting black miniatures, right, black armor and so forth, that you still do a base coat of black, even if you're using black primer. The reason for that is that the second step we're going to do now on the actual model is we're going to base coat everything that's silver. By doing that, we're going to end up, since we're going to be a little sloppy with it, we're going to end up getting a lot of silver over some of these other parts that'll end up black ultimately. And so we're going to have to go back and like do some touch-ups. But that would be a lot, it would take a lot longer to do all of that, to base coat the whole plate later, if we're trying to be clean about it, rather than just doing the touch-ups. And if we didn't do a base coat first and then just did the touch-ups, you would see the difference in the black between the paint and the primer where you just went and did your touch-ups. So you want to make sure that that you do a base coat of Abaddon Black over anything that's ultimately going to be painted black, even if you're using a black primer. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take some lead belcher and a real big, one of our big old green handled brushes here. And we are just going to do a base coat of lead belcher over everything that's going to be silver. So we're going to hit the sarcophagus underneath the front plates here, the Fragstorm launchers here. We're going to hit the inside of the fist, weapon barrels, the undercarriage. So we're going to get the structural components. We're going to get all this underneath here. These plates will end up being black, but we're going to go in with a lot of this structural body in the back here. This will all be silver. A lot of the legs and stuff will be silver. So we're just hitting all of that with some lead belcher. And again, we're going to be sloppy with this because the idea here is to get this base coat done quickly and effectively. You want to get a miniature painted up fast. You can't be spending a bunch of time worrying about being super neat with your first color. So with this silver, we just go in here and apply it really quick, real liberally. Don't worry about being super accurate because we'll go back later once this dries, like we'll clean up, that spot with the black. That's honestly a little bit faster overall. Just get that color down and go back and touch it up real quick than it is to spend forever trying to be really neat and clean and avoid getting that black, or rather this silver color over those other areas that are ultimately going to be black. All right, so now we've got our Leadbelcher base coat down. So now we're going to go back, like I said, with our Abaddon Black and do some touch-ups. Make sure that all of our black armor has no silver hanging over it. So we're going to hit areas like this upper arm cuff here, touch up around these tubing pieces and everything, so on and so forth. Make sure that everything that we want to be black is uniformly black with no silver mess on it. All right, so now that our layer of black has dried, our dreadnought here, we're going to go ahead and do the next step, which is a very light dry brush of Dark Reaper. This is the same color that we're going to use to do the edge highlights that you saw in the infantry models. But what we're doing right now is, again, we're doing just a light dry brush of it, and mostly focusing on trying to get at least some definition across the surface of the parts. I'm personally not a huge fan of just the flat black, armor with the edge highlight look. I like to try and get a little bit more depth and character to the surface of the model. So we're going to use our large dry brush here. This is a thicker haired brush than a lot of our other brushes. You want to make sure that you're using, when you're dry brushing, a brush with stiff hair and it's got hair all the same length. You wipe the overwhelming majority of the paint off of the paper towel until you're just getting residue. onto your paper towel, and then very lightly make circular motions across the parts of the model that you want to dry brush. Now, what this will do, for the most part, is the paint will catch on the edges of these areas, right? So the paint is mostly going to catch along the edges of all these armor plates and so forth, but we are going to get a little bit of the paint residue on the surface. So obviously you can see that those plates up here on the top have that residue. You can see the color difference between that and the front carapace there. So we just want to do this across all of the plates that are ultimately going to be black. And again, this is just to add a little bit more depth and character to black, rather than having it just be flat black with an edge color. The nice thing about this is, since we're doing a dry brush, if you happen to get a little bit of the paint on the silver areas, it's not going to show up heavily enough to really affect that color. So you don't have to worry about being super careful. You know, obviously I'm using a pretty good sized brush here to do this dry brushing. You don't have to worry about using a smaller brush to specifically avoid the silver. Just want to make sure that as you're doing this dry brushing, you're just obviously focusing on the black areas. And again, once we get all of these parts dry brushed up, then we'll be ready for the next step. And we're not going to dry brush the shoulder plates there. Obviously, as Black Templars, the shoulder plates will be white. So we're not going to bother dry brushing the Dark Reaper color over the shoulder plate. Certainly get this plate there that's on the upper arm, and this thing here will be this weapon casing. And there we go. So now we've got a nice dry brush of Dark Reaper across all of our black armor surfaces. So now the next step after this is to apply a Nuln Oil wash to the entire model, because we're going to use that to not only shade the silver, but we're going to be using it to also help us dull back down the dry brush that we just did, right? So we're using it to add some depth, but we don't really want a full-blown blue-gray color across that. We want to make sure that it's still dark, but that it's not flat. So as with all of our paints, we'll shake up our Nuln Oil here, and we're just going to go ahead and apply this across the whole model. Now, the big thing here is you don't want to apply it super heavy to the surfaces of the armor plates. You want to apply it fairly light to those areas. The reason why is that wash is designed to sink into recesses, deep spots on the model. And because of that, it has surface tension. As polarity, it tries to cling to itself. And that will cause it to sit unevenly on the surface of your miniature. So if you apply it very heavily, what it's going to do is it's going to pool, and it's going to pool very heavily in specific parts, on specific spots of the surface. We don't want that, because that'll give us a really, even though we're dealing with basically just black here, right? That'll give us a very uneven, sort of splotchy appearance to those surfaces. So when you apply the wash to the silver areas, make sure you're plenty liberal with the amount of wash that you apply so that it sinks into all those recesses really nicely and darkens everything down. But when you apply the Nuln Oil to the black armor plates, just make sure that you don't over apply. Only put a thin coat down on those plates. All right, so now that we've got our black wash on the miniature, you can see it's reddarkened. You can see it's really nicely our black surfaces, and also obviously shaded down our silver. So what we're going to do next is apply some gold to some little emblems like the skulls and so forth. Put a little bit of red on like the frag launcher pods. Paint in base coats for like the lights and stuff. And then once all that's done, then we're going to apply a brown wash to all those colors as well as the silver itself, to get the silver darkened down even a little bit further. right, and so now we're gonna add our brown wash again to all the colors that we've just base coated on the miniature, as well as on all the silver parts as well, to darken those down even further. So sorry, Kenobi. I totally just painted these white shoulders without recording it. But as far as the steps, it's a base coat of Ulthuan Gray, because that will get you a base coat a lot easier than white. And then you take some Drakenhof Nightshade, the blue wash, and thin it out very heavily, so that you don't get a whole lot of pigmentation from it, and just put it into like the top corners here on the top of the pad, as well as all across the bottom down here to get yourself a little bit of shading. And then you're gonna have to very slowly build up some thin layers of white. This is about 7 or 8 layers of white now that I built up over these parts in order to get this this nice clean look. Because if you attempt, especially on a bigger, broader surface like this, if you attempt to do white in thicker coats just to get it, over with faster, you're gonna end up with brush strokes, and you're gonna like cover up the rivets and everything, and you're gonna you're just gonna end up with a very sloppy looking part. So take your time and make sure it gets done right. But with that being said, the next step is we're gonna quickly go ahead and layer up all of the like accent pieces. So like the red dots here on the frag launchers, the scroll here, all the wires and sensors and everything in the cockpit area here, so that we can get all those accents brightened up and popped. Then after that, we're going to edge highlight all the black and then edge highlight all the silver. And then once that stuff is done, then the only thing will be left will be to do the cross on the left shoulder and then base the model. There we go. So now we've highlighted all of our accent colors there on those various parts. Now, next step, edge highlight all the black. And for that, we're going to go back to our Dark Reaper paint here. This is the color that we originally dry brushed over the black in order to help us add a little bit of depth to the model. But this time, what we're doing is we're edge highlighting with this color. So we're going to be applying solid lines of this color right along all of the hard edges of the different armor plates. So you can see how that helps to define the shape of the armor and sort of pop those edges out. Makes the model look a little more three-dimensional compared to just the flat black. Flat black sort of obviously absorbs all the light. Don't really see a lot of depth with it, which is what a three-dimensional object is. It's all about depth. So you want to make sure that you add that depth even on something that's black. Otherwise, most of the detail in these miniatures ends up getting lost. Detail is really what you're spending your hard-earned bucks on when you're paying the GW price tag for your models. See, we got body all highlighted, nice and defined with the black armor there. Now do the same thing with the arms. There we are. Got the weapons with that highlight as well. So then now, before we do basing and the mark on the shoulder, the last major step, highlight all the silver. For that, we're using Iron Breaker. Going to be a bit brighter, a fair bit brighter than the Lead Belcher base coat that we put on the model, but not quite so bright as, say, Runefang Steel. Would be really obnoxious looking, the highlight, but using the Iron Breaker as a highlight will give us really nice bright edges, as you can see there. Really defining. So here's the launcher without the highlight. There's the one with the highlight. So we're really defining, again, those edges, helping to bring the shape of the miniature to the forefront. So we're placing these highlights again on the hard edges. So that way we can really see the shape of the miniature. There you've got it with all the silver edge highlighted. You can see, obviously, again, that adds a lot of depth. It really makes the silver portions of the model pop. So now the last thing besides the basing we're going to do is just put one of the Black Templar crosses. You can see that we painted those on all the infantry shoulders. So we're going to paint one of those onto the Dreadnought shoulder as well. Now, this is freehand, so this is going to take a relatively steady hand to do. But what we're going to do here is just take some Abaddon Black, put it on our palette here. And we're going to thin it out pretty good because we want this to go on really smooth. Don't want to create a lot of texture with this. And so what we're going to do is we're going to start by just laying out 2 lines. One vertical. One horizontal. Giving ourselves plus shape for the base. Then what we're going to do is paint on some diagonal lines. Coming off of the end of each line. We're going to do that in both directions. The end of each line. Then next, we're going to go from the corners of those diagonal lines to the center . You can also go the opposite way from the center to the corner if you're confident with that. Much easier to start at the end of the line and go towards the center though. And you don't want to go to the exact center point, the plus sign that we made. You want to go slightly wider than that because you don't want the center of the cross to be fine point. Right? And then the last thing we're going to do is just fill in each of these parts. And boom, get yourself a Black Templar cross. And that there, again, aside from the basing, gives us a complete Black Templar Dreadnought. So that is how we do Kenobi's Black Templars. Hope that's helpful, Kenobi. You can put that to good use when painting some more of the models. And if not, you can always send them over to me. And anybody else watching, my name's Dan, aka Death Company 22 on Twitch, and Blood Art Studios. You can see in the top right there. is my studio name. So if you'd like to get any miniatures commissioned yourself, check it out. And we'll see you around.